Nobody expects to find Indian flavors deep in the heart of Ethiopia, but they're everywhere. The spices, the dishes, even the cooking techniques. How did this happen? Was it the result of ancient trade routes, colonial influence, or something even stranger? Stick around, because the truth behind Ethiopia's secret Indian food obsession is more fascinating than you'd ever imagine. At first glance, Ethiopia and India don't seem like they should have much in common. They sit on opposite sides of the Indian Ocean, separated by thousands of miles of water. And yet if you step into an Ethiopian kitchen, you'll find flavors that feel distinctly Indian. Turmeric, cardamom, cinnamon and cloves, staples of Indian cooking, are just as crucial in Ethiopian dishes. Even the method of cooking, from slow-simmered stews to spiced flatbreads, feels strangely familiar. So what's the deal? How did Ethiopian cuisine absorb so much Indian influence? To answer that, we need to go way back, thousands of years, when merchants, sailors, and conquerors turned the Indian Ocean into a massive highway of spices, culture, and food. Long before the Silk Road connected Asia and Europe, the Indian Ocean was already a thriving network of trade routes. And Ethiopia? It sat right in the middle of it all. The Kingdom of Aksum, one of the great ancient civilizations of Africa, was a major trading power between the 1st and 7th centuries AD. Aksum controlled the Red Sea, which meant it had direct access to the massive trade networks linking India, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. Indian merchants sailed across the Arabian Sea loaded with pepper, ginger, and exotic spices. Ethiopian traders in return exported gold, ivory, and frankincense. And with every ship that docked, with every transaction made, ideas and flavors slipped across borders, embedding themselves into Ethiopian culture. One of the earliest records of this connection comes from the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Greek travelogue from the 1st century AD. It describes how Indian merchants frequented East African ports, exchanging spices, textiles, and even rice. Ethiopian rulers at the time valued Indian goods so much that they actively sought out trade with South Indian kingdoms like the Cholas and Pandyas. But it wasn't just spices and textiles that were traded. Knowledge systems, agricultural techniques, and even shipbuilding methods were exchanged between Indian and Ethiopian traders. Indian cotton production methods influenced Ethiopian textile making, and Ayurvedic medicinal herbs made their way into Ethiopian healing traditions. The interconnectedness of these civilizations was so deep that echoes of their exchange still exist today. But trade wasn't just about goods, it was also about people. Indian traders didn't just come to Ethiopia to do business, some of them stayed. Over centuries, Indian merchants established small communities in Ethiopian port cities like Adulis and Zela. These settlers brought their food, cooking styles, and agricultural knowledge, further embedding Indian influence into Ethiopian cuisine. Even today, you can see remnants of these ancient trade networks in Ethiopian dishes. Take berbere, for example, the fiery spice blend that's a staple of Ethiopian cooking. Many of its core ingredients, like dried chilies, ginger, and fenugreek, were first introduced to Ethiopia through Indian trade routes, and the similarities don't stop there. Consider the thick, flavorful stews of both cuisines, Ethiopia's wat and India's curry. The parallel is impossible to ignore. Historical records suggest that South Indian traders also introduced new crops like lentils and certain types of beans, which became integral to Ethiopian cuisine. Some of these crops were even adapted to Ethiopia's unique climate, creating hybrid farming traditions that persist to this day. Another factor that strengthened the Ethiopia-India connection was religion. By the 4th century AD, Ethiopia had embraced Christianity, while many parts of India followed Hinduism and Buddhism. Despite their religious differences, both regions had deep spiritual ties. In fact, Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity has strong links to the traditions of South Indian Christians. The Malabar Christians of Kerala, for example, have historical records of trade and religious exchanges with Ethiopian clergy. This cross-cultural interaction influenced not just religious practices but also food customs. Certain fasting traditions in Ethiopia, where meat is avoided on specific days, mirror Indian vegetarian dietary practices. Additionally, during the medieval period, Indian artisans and craftsmen were invited to Ethiopian courts to help build churches and palaces. These workers brought not only their architectural skills but also their culinary habits, introducing new flavors and techniques into Ethiopian kitchens. There were also Indian Sufi mystics who traveled to Ethiopia, bringing with them not only spiritual teachings but also medicinal and culinary traditions. These interactions further strengthened the fusion of Indian and Ethiopian food culture, especially in regions that welcomed Sufi settlements. Let's talk about the spice game. Ethiopian food is bold, aromatic, and heavily spiced, just like Indian cuisine. And that's no coincidence. Many of Ethiopia's most essential spices, cardamom, black pepper, turmeric, and cumin, trace their origins back to India. But it's not just about individual spices, it's the way they're used. Take niter kiba, Ethiopia's spiced clarified butter. It's packed with cardamom, fenugreek, and turmeric, the same ingredients that give Indian ghee its rich, deep flavor. Then there's shiro, a chickpea-based dish that feels remarkably similar to Indian dal. Even injera, Ethiopia's signature sourdough flatbread, has a distant cousin in Indian dosas. It's not just the ingredients that overlap, cooking techniques do too. Ethiopian slow-cooked stews mirror the long simmering curries of India. The fermentation techniques used to make injera resemble the process of fermenting dosa batter in South India. Even the communal style of eating, where food is shared from a single platter, is a common thread between both cultures. Fast forward to today and the Indian influence on Ethiopian cuisine is still alive and well. But it's not just in the food, it's in the culture. Modern Ethiopian restaurants sometimes use Indian-style tandoor ovens. Some Ethiopian chefs incorporate Indian cooking techniques into traditional dishes. And thanks to globalization, Indian-Ethiopian fusion restaurants are popping up in cities around the world. But this isn't just a one-sided story. Ethiopian flavors have made their way into Indian kitchens too. In parts of South India, especially in Kerala, you'll find dishes that use Ethiopian-inspired spice blends. The food connection between these two regions isn't just history, it's an ongoing exchange that continues to evolve. So, why is Ethiopia obsessed with Indian flavors? It all goes back to the ancient trade routes, the migration of merchants and settlers, and centuries of cultural exchange. From the spice trade of Aksum to modern fusion restaurants, Ethiopia and India have been sharing food, traditions, and ideas for thousands of years. And the best part? That exchange is still happening today. Want more deep dives into hidden history? Subscribe now and don't miss the next one.